It started with a single sentence that cut through the chamber like a cold wind. "Excuse me, Senator, but I believe your time is up." The words came from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, measured and calm, but carrying the sharp edge of finality. The room, tense, already held its collective breath. Cameras zoomed in. Eyes darted. And Senator John Kennedy, known for his Southern charm, wit, and refusal to be steamrolled, lifted his head slowly, like a man deciding whether to pick up a sword or let it rest. It was a high-profile hearing, one of those rare televised moments, when the tension of government debate breaks through the fog of politics and lands right in America's living rooms. Justice Jackson, newly seated on the Supreme Court, was addressing a panel about constitutional interpretations on a controversial federal oversight issue. Kennedy, never shy about cutting through legal jargon with plain talk and pointed questions, had already pushed the conversation into uncomfortable territory, and that's when she tried to cut him off. But something changed in Kennedy's eyes at that moment. It wasn't anger, at least, not the kind that shouts or fumes. It was something deeper, disappointment, maybe even resolve. The kind of quiet fury that settles in the soul of a man who's seen too much posturing and not enough truth. With a deep breath and a slight shake of the head, Kennedy leaned into the microphone. "Madam Justice," he said slowly, "with all due respect, when the people of Louisiana sent me here, they didn't ask me to whisper. They asked me to ask the questions no one else will." The chamber went silent again, but this time it wasn't tension, it was reverence. You could feel it, the gravity of that moment, when political theater gave way to something more raw, more human. Kennedy wasn't being disrespectful. He wasn't grandstanding. He was standing his ground, and he continued, not louder, but steadier. He painted the picture of a father who had written to him about his daughter's life being destroyed by bureaucratic overreach. He talked about a farmer whose land had been tied up in red tape for years, while courts debated definitions from 70 years ago. He wasn't quoting law books. He was telling stories, the kind that echoed in empty kitchen tables and small-town diners across the country. Justice Jackson tried once more to interject, reminding him that this was not a trial, but a policy review hearing. But Kennedy, polite and firm, said something that hung in the air long after the cameras stopped rolling. When the law forgets the people it's meant to serve, it becomes a cage, not a compass. Even Justice Jackson seemed momentarily disarmed, not because she was wrong, but because Kennedy wasn't either. In that moment, the hearing stopped being about who was right, and became about who was heard. As the exchange unfolded, something rare happened. Members of both parties sat back and listened. They weren't just nodding for the cameras, they were reflecting. Kennedy's words had hit a nerve, not because they were aggressive, but because they were real, and by the end of his questioning, something shifted in the atmosphere. Justice Jackson, to her credit, acknowledged the depth of the stories he brought forward. There was no apology, but there was a pause, of recognition that perhaps law and life don't always move in sync. Afterward, as Kennedy walked out of the chamber, a young intern approached him. Nervous, maybe even shaking a little, she asked why he didn't just let it go when she interrupted. He looked at her and said, "Because if we let go of the truth, every time it's inconvenient, we'll forget how to hold it when it matters most." That moment would go viral. Not for its drama, but for its honesty. It reminded people that politics, at its best, isn't about who can speak the loudest, but who's willing to speak when silence would be easier. In the days that followed, people from across the country, conservatives, moderates, even some liberals, shared that clip. They didn't agree with everything Kennedy said, but they agreed with why he said it. And that was the victory. Not for Kennedy, not for Jackson, but for the idea that courage doesn't always shout, it often speaks plainly and refuses to sit down. Because sometimes, trying to silence a voice only makes it stronger.